Welcome to the Say Goodbye and Imagine podcast. I am Rose Ann Forte, the author of the daily devotional called The Plans He Has for Me, and the creator of the Choose Freedom course that goes with it to help people change their relationship with alcohol and other substances. Welcome to part two with Dr. Parsons from Amen Clinics. And part two of this podcast episode is about going through the results of my brain scan. And so uh, I'm excited to hear I kind of again and re-ask questions and summarize, but I just wanted to share openly about what my history was and where I am. I wish I had the before scan because I know it would have looked different. But before we start, I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Parsons. She graduated from medical school from Wayne State University in Michigan. She practiced in various settings, including consult liaison and medical floors and emergency departments, inpatient psychiatry, medical director for the largest community mental health center in northern Arizona. She does addiction and recovery work, including detox, residential, and outpatient. She also runs a private practice with a primary focus on holistic care. And I said it last time, I'll say it again. I love it. And you're going to see some of that in action in this podcast. Dr. Parsons is passionate about helping to end the stigma of mental illness. Oh my goodness. Amen. Bless you for doing this work. And again, before we start, the content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individual guests and do not constitute medical advice. Always seek the guidance of a qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding your health, medical conditions, or treatments. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. And one last thing, if you are enjoying this podcast, make sure to like it, follow it, and recommend it to other people because that's how people will find out about it. Thanks, and get help and get the help they need and reduce stigma. So, with that, welcome, Dr. Parsons. It's so good to have you back again. I so appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one because we're going to go through my brain results. But let me just give a little bit of a history of. I gave this history when I did the application and all the paperwork to do the scan. So that's an important part of, I know, you assessing my brain health. But my history includes being diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I have been heavily addicted to cigarettes in the past. I started at 13. I That problem was from morning till when I woke up till at night. When I went to bed, I needed pharmaceuticals to get off of that problem, and I also had very, very heavy alcohol usage. I have a history of what I call a toxic and unhealthy marriage relationship, and I used EMDR therapy to deal with healing from that. And so that's a little bit of the history of what you would have seen if I had the ability to do a before brain scan. So what I tell people is I'm sure there would have been a lot of more dark spots or dark areas. If I had that before scan. So I wanted you to report because after having been through this process with you, I feel, there's still work to do for sure, but there's a lot of great news too. And I just want, you know, to get your input on what you saw basically overall on the screen, especially given that history. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I really appreciate your willingness to be open about this and share because I agree that, getting this out there as much as possible is going to help people not only to realize that there truly are neurobiological reasons for people having the challenges that they have, and then also let them realize that there's help as well. So on your scan in particular, when you and I sat down and talked and I pulled up your scans, we reviewed those together. I showed you the areas that left you vulnerable to experiencing certain things.
Mm,
And one of them was decreased activity in your prefrontal cortex. And especially when you concentrated. So the prefrontal cortex was that area of the brain that is executive function. It allows us to decide what we want to do, come up with a plan of how to do it, initiate it, complete what we want to do. And it's impulse control as well. It's the brakes of the brain, the part of the brain that allows us to stop and think through, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this before we actually engage in whatever it may be, whether it's saying something too quickly or picking up a cigarette or a drink, whatever it may be. And it's also interestingly the part of our brain that lets us learn from our mistakes. And so the better that part of our brain works, the more we have agency over our lives, the more we are able to be effective, the more we can really focus and do things in a linear fashion, come up with a plan, make our goals, stick with it, stay on task rather than diverting or something else may come up and just sort of shoot us off in a different direction. And the quicker we can self correct, the quicker we can get back on track when it does happen, because again, there's that learning from our mistakes portion. And and so you shared that you have had those challenges with addiction and an extended period of time, and of course that's kind of what we see often when people have challenge in their prefrontal cortex. They are more likely to have addiction because that's that agency, that part of the brain that lets us really decide what do we really want to do with our lives. Now, having said that, though, there are other parts of the brain that will either allow us to feel comfortable in our own skin, or they may actually make us feel anxious and insecure, and they might give us fearful thoughts, and they might also cause us to feel very sensitive. The world is full of very sensitive, highly sensitive people. And the more sensitive we feel, the more our world, if we are not in a warm, nurturing environment, can feel painful. We looked at your brain in particular, Roseanne, and we saw that you are a sensitive person. It is in your neurochemistry. So you had an area of your brain called the deep limbic system, which makes you empathic. It makes you sensitive. And while that can be a very nice thing, if a person has learned that the world is not very safe, if they have some maladaptive coping skills for various things that are happening, and if they possibly have even learned to be a fixer, then they can kind of take the world on their own shoulders and try to fix things and stick with it. Yes, it's not working, but I love him. I made this commitment. I'm going to keep on going, and unfortunately, sometimes get to a point of burnout, personal burnout. And that can obviously lead to people's bodies and brain not functioning as well as they can, because adrenals begin to burn out, thyroid can begin to have problems. We might have issues with digestion. Of course, digestion and mental health go hand in hand. And so it can tick down how a person is doing and ultimately lead to them feeling depleted and non resilient in that kind of a situation. Now, it can also be a great benefit. It just depends on what's happening and person's history. Another part of the brain that has to do with emotions that we discussed for you is the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia is sort of like our thermostat for calm or tension. So the less activity we have there, the more there may be a sense of calm. And the more activity there is, the more there is a likelihood of tension going up, up, up. For some, that feels really uncomfortable, tense, nervous, shoulders, neck, headaches, maybe even. It
mm,
can also cause a person to have some worst case scenario thinking, catastrophic thinking, a lot of worry. And interestingly, the reward pathways run through this part of the brain, and therefore it can also prime those reward centers and leave a person more vulnerable to addiction. So we see this, of course, when people have a family history. We all know something is happening. Why is it that some people might be able to experiment with something or use something casually and they're okay? They can stick with that. And why do other people find that it's a slippery slope and it can really take them down?
Can I ask
So
a
it's
question in the middle of this?
Sure.
So, yeah, so this part of my brain was super excitable, right? And so as it relates to um alcohol, which is what I use, or cigarettes before that, it was a way to calm that part of my brain that was not holistic. Would that be a proper summary?
Yes, that's excellent. That's a perfect summary. Yes, alcohol will actually help that part of the brain to feel a little more settled. But unfortunately, as you said, not the healthiest way. And there is an equal and opposite reaction for everything that we do. And so while you may feel settled in the moment, then unfortunately, when the alcohol wears off, it's the opposite: anxious, more nervous, more tension. And then a person is more likely to reach for it again. And eventually, it can become a dependence where a person has to reach for it first thing in the morning in order to feel okay.
Right. Yeah, it's the body the body is a beautiful thing. It's designed so amazingly. If we give it too much of something, we talked about this in the last podcast, but this is the thing that I really want people to know about addictive substances is that we can use them and they do. I'm not going to deny that they don't solve the problem like immediate, but it's this immediate gratification. And you're like, oh, that felt good. I need to do it again and again and again. So I I describe, I think what you were sharing before about my personality. When I talk to people, I'm like just the pedal to the metal kind of person. Go, 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 go. You I don't do anything half baked, right? And that includes, drinking or, smoking or everything I do, pedal to the metal. I think that's what my brain showed, right?
It is what your brain showed. Yeah. Which is, a really if a person's energy is pointed in a positive, productive place, then that's a wonderful, enriched life. But if it's not, then it can also really spell disaster for some
That
people.
is exactly what my personal research on myself has shown is that my thoughts and energies were well, for me on a faith-based, right, it was in a divisive pattern. So it was confused, there was cognitive dissonance. I don't know if that shows up in the brain scan, but I love Jesus, I love God. I wanted to, follow this path, but my actions were away, 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 and, it just didn't work, and now and actually, I probably tilted more away, right? Because even though I knew everything about God, I felt unlovable, I felt horrendous, I hated myself, I prayed to God to, let the bus hit me, and that was my thoughts going in the wrong direction, but when I understood Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord's plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I believed it. And I just kept walking that way. That's exactly what you're saying is the pedal to the metal has worked the other way. Writing a book, creating a course, doing a podcast with you, right? Goes the other way. But thank you for saying that. That was super cool. Um, so basal ganglia and where else did I want to go with this? What else do you remember about that came up? Oh, I know. I'm sorry. Here's ADD. Is it ADD or ADHD? Like I always knew or suspected I had an issue with that, but I never felt like I needed to be medicated. But it's boom, boom, boom. Like I can change, I can be distracted. I have to people like you're the fastest email responder. That's because if I don't do it, I'll forget about it. Like do it, do it, do it. My ADD is horrible yet sometimes helpful. So do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes. So we certainly did see that on your scan. You definitely do have a brain that is consistent with ADD because when you concentrate, your prefrontal cortex actually dropped out instead of becoming more supported. So your blood flow actually dropped out when you were concentrating.
Wow.
And you've learned how to adapt to it clearly, and obviously it's something that continues to be very helpful in your life to some extent. So anybody can do that. Of course, we have tools, we have wonderful ADD coaches that can help people to really understand how does my brain actually work? Why am I having a hard time getting from point A to point B? Why is it just, all over the place before I can get there? And then they can help you to structure things in such a way that you can get there easier. But, the severity is different, of course. It depends on what's happening in various other areas of the person's brain as well. ADD is not just one thing. And by the way, the difference in ADD versus ADHD, that's just really semantics. Hyperactivity is present in about half of people, according to the diagnosis, the DSM, which is what we use to help diagnose people. But what we know based on brain scanning is that ADD comes from a lot of different things. You can actually have um, kind of an anxious ADD, which is where the basal ganglia are making it really hard for a person to utilize their prefrontal cortex. You can also have depressed ADD. The deep limbic system is pulling the brain down so much, making them feel so sad, so unmotivated, so unable to really connect that they also can't really focus. So it's um it's something that Dr. Amen has done a beautiful job at disseminating information about so that people realize ADD is not just one thing. And so treatment is also not just one thing. It depends on what a person actually has, what actually is going on inside of the brain that's causing the problems. And I will say too, and you know this, of course, firsthand, Roseanne, that ADD is something that also frees a person up to be more creative, to be more spontaneous, to be more adventurous because the brakes are just lifted a little bit. And so there's more fluidity, there's more ability to get going and do things that are often, though, exciting, interesting, enjoyable, because things that are not interesting can make the prefrontal cortex really drop out. So that internal adrenaline needs to be released for a person to really kick in and do things.
So I have some good news for you, Dr. Parsons, because there were some recommendations that you made for me specifically. I remember we're just talking about for me, and I was really shocked when you said my prefrontal cortex was like lacking in blood flow. I mean, it made sense because my I have to concentrate, right? And I do compensate, but I got super excited, brain envy, right? Super excited at the possibility that I could increase this focus and attention. And so you recommended, let's see, well, you recommended I needed to give up coffee, at least to the extent I was drinking it. And I already knew that the brain scan results, because I've heard Dr. Amen talk about coffee and I drank it crazy like um, and so coffee also wasn't hit exercise meant
Mhm,
for that. Was there another recommend and was dopamine part of that?
mhm,
Okay. So those three things I started that um I started taking a dopamine supplement. I started doing and this is the great thing, people. This was exciting for me. You only have to do 6 minutes of hit. Okay. That means only 3 intervals at a minute of high if anybody doesn't know HIIT, it's high intensity interval training. And you can do, research. There's all kinds of ways you can do that. Talk to a trainer, go to a gym, ask any group training person, but just 6 minutes. And I think, did you say 3 times a week or
You
five?
can do it 3 times a week. I would prefer you do it 5 to
I
6
did it
times a week.
6.
Nice.
I did it 6. I gave up coffee and I started taking the dopamine supplements. And this past Saturday, I have just been overwhelmed with foots of paperwork scattered everywhere in my office and just overwhelmed with it. I focused on Saturday like I do not remember. My office has never looked so organized and clean. And I'm like, it had to be those 3 things. And that was just a week. That was 1 week. I'm like excited.
Isn't that phenomenal? And you didn't have to deviate a whole lot, it doesn't sound like, from your normal routine. Take a supplement, do the high intensity interval training, 6 minutes. And of course, things like getting really good sleep, taking good care of yourself, making sure you're eating healthy, focusing on protein containing foods, which helps to raise dopamine, making sure you're eating 3 meals a day. Breakfast is going to help wake up those prefrontal cortex areas as well. Simple things.
Well, and now we have an equal and opposite reaction, I think is what you're talking about, because I was so motivated that only 6 minutes would make a difference. Not that I believed it at the time, but I was hopeful. And it was worth it. And then I did these things and I'm seeing the results like almost immediately. Now I still don't have that concentration thing I'm working on, but you recommended another supplement that was GABA, right? The GABA supplement, I believe.
I recommended a couple. So, yeah, one of them was GABA, and that was specifically to help settle down your basal ganglia so that you would feel more calm, more centered, and therefore have more of that agency over how you utilize the tension that your body is presenting to you. Put it
Mhm.
in that very productive way. We also talked about some tea at night, chamomile tea, things that just kind of help a person to get into a space of, I am doing my self care. This is for me to have a good night's sleep. And then I recommended a couple of possibilities for you to raise up dopamine. One of them was Focus and Energy Optimizer. And then the other one is called Dopa Plus. That
Right.
one's from Pure Encapsulations.
Yeah, that's the one I chose. And then the brain health one was from Amen Clinics. But I'm just excited, just about the now, when would someone do a follow-up scan? How many months where you would wanna see, um, the differences? Is it a 6-month, thing where you really start seeing major differences in scan results?
It's really interesting because we have actually done brain scan next day after taking the Brain and Body Power Max, which is a high dose multivitamin with a supplement that raises blood flow, supports mitochondria, raises acetylcholine, and also good high dose of EPA and DHA, the kind of omega-3 fats that we know that the brain needs. And you actually do see an improvement immediately. So the
Wow.
effects aren't right away. However, what we recommend for people is that they initiate the plan in its entirety for a good 3 to 6 months and then rescan and see what kind of changes are happening, because it's highly motivating to witness the changes that are happening inside of your brain.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I kind of knew certain things would show up, um, but, uh yeah, it was crazy. So in terms of the addiction part, how when you're looking at a brain for addiction, you're not really looking at, well, we can talk I say lumpy, right? When you do a brain scan, it's really about blood flow, isn't it? Mostly about blood flow. But when we see a picture of it, if anybody goes on Amen Clinic's website, they'll see pictures of, I think I have one here. when you walk into Amen Clinics, he has a poster that looks like this, and this is I'm holding up a poster that says, you know, what does a healthy brain look like? What does 4 years of marijuana look like? What does 4 years of tobacco look like? What does 6 years of cocaine or 10 years of alcohol? And it's a pretty nasty sight. I mean, visually, it just looks like there's holes in your brain, which I assume the holes mean there is zero blood flow going there, right?
Not 0. No, it's actually when the blood flow is falling by 55%, it looks like a hole, looks like a divot, looks like an empty space. Now you can see that at 45% too, and oftentimes what we'll do is change the threshold of what we're seeing, the amount of blood flow, so we can get a sense of the kind of improvements that people can have. But on a scan like this, what we are looking at is every part of the brain receiving enough blood flow to support optimal functioning, to support proper functioning? And if there is decreased blood flow to certain areas, does that correlate with symptoms that a person is experiencing? And what does the pattern we're seeing tell us about why it's there in the first place? And then the other kind of scan that we do is looking at levels of activity. And that's when we really look at those inside emotional centers in the brain to see what areas are too active, not active enough, or where they should be. And again, correlating that with symptoms and getting a sense of, again, why would this be happening? You know, for some people, it shows up as being very inflamed. And of course, that's a clue. We don't stop there. We want to know, well, why is this inflammation happening? And how do we fix that so that that settles down and then a person feels better?
Right. And my scan did not show those divots, right?
Yours did have a couple of divots. And so that was the decreased activity in that prefrontal cortex that we looked at. You also had decreased blood flow to your temporal lobes, which sit right here, kind of behind your ears, just right inside there. And that's involved in things like mood, anxiety, irritability, memory, word finding, processing speed. We can also have unexplained abdominal pain, unexplained headaches, a sense of deja vu if we have difficulty in that part of the brain. And what we saw on yours was decreased blood flow, which is why we really focused on how do we support blood flow there so we can raise that up. So now that part, all of these parts of the brain are receiving more of what they need to fuel their functions.
Yeah, and so I shared with this with you in my brain scan. I mean, and when we sat down for the first time going through my results. And so I was surprised about that showing up, the temporal lobes showing up in terms of mood, because I feel like I'm a very optimistic, happy, you know, just joyful person. And then when I really kind of tried to make the connection between what you were saying and how I was feeling, I realized what the difference was. And I think I shared this with you. So, and this may just be part of my DNA, or we'll see what happens when I start working on it, because I haven't really started doing the work in that area. But I understand the physicality of stress. I think, and that's what you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. I understand that when somebody triggers me, it happens in my chest or my stomach. So I think that's the physicality that you're talking about and you're seeing. I'm empathetic. I feel it. I see it. I react. But what I have trained myself to do through positive psychology, positive intelligence, is to not react, to go, this is wrong, this is a wrong motive. I actually, it has to do with my North Star. How would Jesus want me to react? Um, and stop. So then I can process. So I think that, again, when you first told me that, I was resistant to what you were telling me, because I'm like, I don't react. I'm not a mean person. I have this under control. But I think what's happening is the physical part of my brain is reacting, but I've compensated through learning techniques to manage it. Does that
That's exactly yes, that's exactly, correct. So, these are vulnerabilities that live inside of our neurochemistry. It does not, though, dictate what our life is going to be like.
Oh,
What really matters yeah, what really matters is what do we do with it? Do we do we sit with the experiences that come from having some challenges in these part of the brain and decide, "Oh, I don't wanna do that again," and then learn a different way of being in the world? Or do we let it keep going? And I think we all know people that we can say, "Yeah, they might have let it just kinda keep going." They might be letting their reactions come from that place rather than doing the hard work, which is, how do we overcome this? How do we, yes, have this maybe inside of our biochemistry, neurochemistry, but we don't want to react that way. We don't want to live in that sort of a way. And so we overcome it. And so that's where prayer, meditation, therapy, exercise, eating healthy, really doing the things that are telling our body, our neurochemistry, I will take care of you. And and then doing something different, doing what we know at the end of the day is going to make us feel fulfilled and satisfied, happy with ourselves. Like you said, your North Star. What does your North Star want you to do? So you've really internalized that. Just so beautiful. And holding yourself to that accountability, which is perfect. I think we all need to really embrace these are the baseline sensations that might be inside of me, but what do I do about them? Because I don't want to go through my days a victim to the emotions that come up automatically. None of us wants to do that because we won't feel good about ourselves. So how do we overcome that? That's the hard work.
yeah, yeah, and it's fun for me to see the connection between the brain and the what do I want to call it? I mean, I am wired that way, but there's also some improvement. So what you're saying is, and I can't remember what the recommendations were for that part. Was that the GABA? That's GABA, right? The calm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And so I want to share something with you that I noticed about my journey as well. And that was I was super angry and reactive. Um, I mean, yeah, just angry and reactive all the time. And when I got rid of the alcohol, it was like taking off blurred glasses, right? All of a sudden, people that bothered me didn't bother me. And it was just like, oh, let it go. Who cares? Like, and I think what you're saying is if I continue to kind of work on that part, even less will bother me. So even less I will have to train myself not to react to. That's kind of hopeful.
Yes, absolutely. And life is a journey, of course. None of us is finished with this until we take our last breath. And so it will continue to be something that you work on with time because that is you. Your North Star is so internalized inside of you that I think you are just one of those people, Roseanne, that will continue to make sure that you are learning from the impulses that come up. How do I become even better than that?
Yeah, and there's just so much to look forward to from being miserable and anxious about what's going on in the world and what you can't control to just uh, ease and flow and direction and purpose and using gifts and talents. Whew, I don't feel like the same human being anymore. So
I don't think you are the same human being anymore.
I
I
know.
want to say, you know what? I want to add one more layer of your brain scan to what we've already talked about because you just mentioned something very important, and that was ease and flow. There's another part of your brain that was overly active, and that was called the anterior cingulate gyrus, which is a gear shifter that lives inside of our brain. So, this part of our brain helps us to shift gears, to go from thought to thought, from worry to worry without getting stuck, to be flexible, to have that ease, to have that flow. The more activity we have in this part of the brain, the more that gear shifter is getting stuck. So, we'll get stuck on fears, stuck on worries, stuck in our emotional state, have a hard time getting out of it. We might hold grudges. We might not like other people to tell us what to do. We might be argumentative. We might also pick ourselves apart. It's called excess error detection. So, error detection is good. It's where we can see when things are not quite right. That allows us to correct them. But if it's excessive, then a person might really rip themselves to shreds. That can cause problems with self esteem. Yeah. They might turn it outward, become critical of other people, and that can cause problems in relationships. Now, as this part of the brain relates to addiction, because it is the gear shifter, it'll it can get a person stuck in a place of thinking about the thing they're addicted to and therefore make it harder to stop doing the thing, especially if they also have increased activity in that addiction vulnerability area, the basal ganglia, and decreased activity in that prefrontal cortex, the brakes of the brain. So it's sort of this triad of setting the brain up to be vulnerable to addiction, and you had that.
Okay. You said something and then I lost it, so I'm trying to get that back. So you said oh, are you talking about the diamond that you saw or a different part of the brain?
It is a part of the diamond. It's at the very top of the diamond. It's the one part of it, the anterior cingulate gyrus. The diamond is showing me that your brain was in a state of fight or flight,
Mm.
that your nervous system was active. And you mentioned that you can feel certain things inside of your body. So there's this element of this vagus nerve, which goes from our brain to our body, huge nerve, sending down information of something is not safe. So I need to make sure that the body is prepared to fight, flight, or freeze.
I
And
think
that's that
that was
part.
my reactivity. I was using the alcohol to medicate, and my reactivity was out of fear of being, you know, I just perceived fear. Now I know how to like look at the world through clear glasses, assess real danger. And yeah, so you said my that part of the brain was overly active, but what about today? That's what does that mean for me today? Because I
Well, so here's the thing. I don't know what your brain looked like when you were really having a hard time. I only know what it looks like today. I wonder what it looked like back then. I'm betting based on the symptoms that you experienced, based on the fact that you were still drinking, you were still smoking, your lifestyle wasn't as healthy, and therefore your brain was probably suffering much more so than what we're seeing today. I think you've done some wonderful repair work inside of your brain, and that's reflected in what we're seeing. But because we don't have that scan to be able to measure, we can only make the assumption it probably looked worse than it does today. And that's a good assumption to make because your
probably
experience of life.
yeah, yeah, because I don't have any more major depressive disorder. I probably have a little bit of um PTSD or CPTSD in terms of my reactability. But again, I try and um, I have methodologies to not react. And that's what I want people to be hopeful about is to, that's part of one of the core concepts is capturing your thoughts, especially when you recognize them to be disobedient with God's will. Because we have a lot of thoughts about taking out the imaginary bat. Just stop, don't say that. And, fighting words never solved a thing, never. Not in one instance have I ever seen that fighting words solved anything. And, huh?
Most definitely. Yes. That diamond pattern is correlated with PTSD, CPTSD. So the work that you're doing is really to help you manage that activity.
Yeah. Yep, I believe it. And then the last thing you recommended was really food choices. Do you have that handy to go through that, or do you remember that? Because, you know, uh, we want we want insurance to start covering brain scans, but until they do, we want to make sure that people understand some of the simple, holistic, which is what I love about you and your work. You're always going to look for the holistic approach to healing before before prescribing medication, and I'm sure you do that as well when it's necessary, correct? And I actually, even though that doesn't have to do with me, I do want to ask that question um, after we address the food. But can you talk about how our food choices affect? And we were just talking about this before we went on too, about how my food choices are definitely going to help me continue to heal.
So I think it's very important for people to always recognize that they are extremely powerful, that their choices are going to shape what's happening in their lives through the way that it shapes their neurochemistry, their biochemistry. We truly are what we eat. So when we are eating processed, mostly ultra processed foods, that of course is going to really bring us down. And it has a lot of chemicals in it. So it has layers of reasons why it's not the best choices for us. When it comes to really how to support our brain, certainly whole foods as much as possible, certainly organic as much as possible. If it's coming from a trusted source, you know that they really aren't getting runoff from nearby farms. Things that are going to raise up dopamine. So to help with our executive function, with that breaks of the brain, with impulse control, with ADD kind of things, those are protein rich foods. And so think about things like fish and lentils and lamb and chicken. And I'm actually looking at our list. I have a list I think I sent to you, Roseanne, of these various foods because I want people to have this. I want people to know that this is something that they can do themselves. Broccoli and spinach and protein powders and turmeric. All of those things are wonderful for supporting that part of the brain. And I mentioned, of course, eating breakfast, very important to prime your brain to start making the dopamine that's going to allow you to stay focused all throughout the day. Hydration, because we need to have the blood volume necessary to get everything up there. The top of our brain, we have to push against gravity. That's a lot to ask of our body and our heart. So we need to give it some support by filling the tank. When it comes to how do we help with the gear shifter in our brain? How do we help our thinking to be more flexible, to be less self critical, less worried? We're thinking about serotonin and moods that are foods that are going to raise up serotonin are going to be things like complex carbohydrates. People that need serotonin often don't do well with a ketogenic diet because their serotonin tends to fall even further, and that can make them feel pretty irritable and angry. But think about things like eggs and turkey and seafood and chickpeas and nuts and healthy carbohydrates. So think sweet potatoes and think about things like quinoa and things of that sort.
I was so happy when you said that because, I mean, I'm Italian. I have tried these keto diets and they just don't work. And I feel like they increase my desire for sugar or some carb, right? And just adding in a little bit of those complex carbohydrates, I think are so important. And it's wonderful to hear you talk about the fact that it increases brain health.
The brain knows what it needs and it will send you the signals. It will find a way to tell you, and that will come in the form of cravings. And so, if you do try to go ketogenic and you cut out all carbohydrates and you happen to be someone that's already low in serotonin, your brain is going to reject that and cause those cravings to come, which will cause you then to want the complex carbohydrates. Now, that is, though, different from someone who may eat a lot of simple carbohydrates and perhaps have something like a candida overgrowth. Now, they may be craving sugar because the brain has been essentially hijacked in order to do so to feed the candida.
Um, yeah, and I've been diagnosed with that too in the past, so I totally understand. But I mean, this is just so good because we all know it, we all hear it, we all want to, be on the diet, and we all know go organic. But now we're hearing it as to how it affects our brain, right? And most people that address it as a gut issue, which is super important because they go hand in hand. But understanding, especially as you said, dopamine, because we have burnt out our dopamine system, which is why we look at the substance with so much romanticism because our body is saying we need that, and so we want to reach for it. But to when we're challenging ourselves to get off of the addictive substance, we need to fill our bodies with dopamine rich nutrients. And oh my gosh, it's beautifully, beautifully stated. And I need to write down things. I said I was going to ask you one more thing, and now I forgot what it was. Do you remember? I think I need an area of brain health. Oh darn.
It was when we were talking about the foods that help to fill up various parts of our brain.
Yeah, but I was going to ask you one question before we ended the podcast. But is there anything else? Sorry, listeners, we're not going there because I forgot because that part of my brain has ADD. But is there anything else? I always like to ask if there's anything else to that you would want to share about maybe what you saw um, and or giving hope to people because this is your thing, right? That you're the addiction specialist, and so I'd love it if you would give people kind of a last look at what you'd like to share with people. Yeah.
Our brain is not our destiny. What's happening inside of our brain is not necessarily our destiny. What happens in our genetics is not necessarily our destiny. I know that there are definitely people out there that feel a sense of hopelessness because they may have addiction in the family and maybe it's all over the place. Maybe there's mental illness in the family and they may have a sense of, well, gosh, this is just, I'm doomed because that happens to be what's there. What I would really say is what matters is not so much the genes that you have inherited, but what kind of an environment is your DNA sitting in? Are your genes sitting in? And that's really what we're talking about is epigenetics. How do we change the environment? How do we make the environment that our DNA sits in as healthy and nutrient rich and supportive as possible so that the DNA is being made into proteins that are supporting us as much as possible. And it's never too late to go back and start making those kinds of changes, even if it's incremental. It is never too late. Those are things that are impactful. So all of these things that we're talking about, the supplements, the lifestyle, the diet, the exercise, all of those things are really critical. And I will say too, when people come in and get scanned, when they get their brain scanned, that is also not unchangeable. That
Hmm.
is changeable. And I always want to make sure that people have hope by the time we're finished. They may come in a pretty dark place, but this is a hopeful process because it is seeing what is there that has been causing the problems that a person has been experiencing, but it's bringing light to it. It's bringing awareness. And it's really only when we have an awareness of those things that we can start doing something about them. It is a very hopeful process. And I want to make sure that everyone, again, leaves that with hope. The doctor that is seeing the person, if they come here to the Amen Clinic or they get a SPECT scan done elsewhere, the doctor that is helping you, is guiding you, will show you individually how your brain is having challenges and what you can do specifically to help that. And again, if you want to recheck and see the changes, it's very motivating.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely gonna make an appointment in 6 months, Dr. Parsons. See if we can calm a few of those, remaining, stubborn areas, and, yeah, I just really, appreciate, you and the work you do and the work Amen Clinics is doing, and I said it last podcast, but we'll say it again, we just need to keep getting the word out there, that, it's not a character flaw. It's where there are genes that, for me, I had the gene, okay, fine, but I didn't have to turn it on. And if somebody had told me, I I do a lot of posts and I'm like, if why didn't somebody tell me? And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to tell everyone, why, this alcohol thing is not what you think. And I think I would have been a little bit more careful had somebody told me. And knowledge is powerful, and I want people to stop beating themselves up and know that something different is possible, especially when they turn their attention to follow God. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.